With the video today, I want to do something that seems probably superfluous to most of you, or at least nugatory and nonsensical. Why would I bother covering what I feel as if is a meaningless discussion, or at least so boring and banal and vapid that it just doesn't bring that much value. It's covering current affairs in a way that's terminal. So the idea that the Middle East will be anything other than what it is always, it's a bit silly. It's always going to be this crappy hellhole. That's just the nature of the Middle East. But I will walk through why. I guess there's at least a justification behind the reasoning of lack of coverage or lack of care or lack of purpose to this discussion topic. It is very popular amongst pundits, commentary, and media for reasons that are obviously dramatic mostly, rather than any other meaningful discussion. But what is this Aporia of the Middle East? Why is it that there is so much turmoil and distrust and conflict? Well, hopefully a lesson in cartography from yours truly, the Liberator, will show you why. Because the Middle East is a dog's breakfast of countries. Now, due to colonization from our lovely Western forebears, we have basically carved up several segments of the Middle East into notional nation states. And this process, you basically arbitrarily denominate something around this is the telluric methodology around the nomos. So the legal, as Carl Schmitt says, how do you define the property of the country in by what its boundaries basically allocate the nominal ownership of property of the people that live within them. So the society is bound to the boundaries. And in doing that, you basically form what is a cohesive society on certain lines. Now, it's much easier to have a disparate or diverse population work collectively if they have either a very strong identity to latch onto that's community-based, so you could say something like Islam, or it's something around an external enemy. So you can have something like America feel very banded together when you've got an external enemy like Russia. It's like, wow, we are all American patriots against the Russian menace, or the USSR, the Soviet menace. This becomes a very easy proposition to bind national identity into that. But once you have the dissolution of that, so it dissolves into the ether, and out of that you pull nothing in terms of crystallize a salient enemy, what happens is then you have a lack of or introspection of identity. So you say, like, actually, you know what, I am quite different to my neighbor now that I realize I don't have an enemy outside threatening me, my inside neighbors are threatening me. And this is how you can see the snowball effect almost of identity politics, is because when you lack the external enemy, introspection leads us to wild conclusions around, actually, you know what, if 13% of my population are murdering at unforeseen rates of 60%, maybe that's actually not American, that's not someone I identify closely with. Or if 30% of my population is foreign-born illegal immigrants, aliens, then maybe they're actually not American, even though they work at the American farm or the American factory alongside me. So you can see how this starts to disassemble. And it's not to upbraid immigrants or anything like that, but that's just the notion of what the identity politics background is formed from and how it's fomented into what is a soft, cold civil war for Americans. But on the Middle East in particular, we've seen an acceleration version of that, and particularly because the lines drawn on borders never really had a lot of logic to it. It's very historical. That whole region is 2,500, 3,000 years old in a lot of cases around identity. So it's very hard to keep a coherent, cogent system around drawing lines of borders, which have never really been historically established by anything other than warlords. And particularly in that region, warlords were the dictates. So how they ruled and who they ruled were basically done by the scimitar. For better or for worse, that's just how the Arab / Pan-Arab / Berber and sub-Saharan, sub-Asian, what do you call them, Indians basically, Indic cultures were ruled. This is stemming somewhat from Islam, but in general, this is how they were ruled prior to Islam anyway. Different cultures there stemming out of the collapse of the Roman Empire. So I think it's important to understand that the region is a complete mess and will always be a mess, and there's no solution to this. There isn't some very smart statesman who will shamble through and fix everything. I think, who cares enough to do that? I wouldn't. It's pointless and meaningless. Even if there was a peaceable solution to all of these conflicts, why would I bother the energy for it? What benefit does a stable Middle East give anybody? I mean, their nature is to not be stable, it's instability, so they'll just revert to that entropically, so what's the point? Second of all, they like it. This is how they live. They enjoy this. There's a atavistic sense of competition, tribalistic conflict here, which they enjoy. And whether they say that expressively or not, as tacit or as taciturn, then this is just the state of things. They like the combat. So anyway, I'll start with a quote here from Spengler. He, in Decline of the West, derives a lot of ideas from the Magian culture, which is the predominating force in that region. It expired a long time ago, and we can think of the Ottoman Empire as the crumbled edifice, which has been the last remnant of that Magian civilization, and that was back in, say, World War I, the end of World War I. But prior to that, the exhaustion set in many hundreds of years before, and so Magian culture stems out of late, you could say, Judaism, early Christianity, and all the way through to Mohammedanism and beyond. So we find Spengler at least highlighting this here by saying, thus again and again we find the logos idea getting back to the light sensation from which the Magian understanding derived it. The world of Magian mankind is filled with a fairy tale feeling. Devils and evil spirits threaten man. Angels and fairies protect him. There are amulets and talismans, mysterious lands, cities, buildings and beings, secret letters, Solomon's seal, the philosopher's stone, and over all this is poured the quivering cavern light that the spectral darkness ever threatens to swallow up. If this profusion of figures astonishes the reader, let him remember that Jesus lived in it, and Jesus' teachings are only to be understood from it. Apocalyptic and is only a vision of the fable, intensified to an extreme tragic power. Already in the book of Enoch, we have the crystal palace of God, the mountains of precious stone, and the imprisonment of apostate stars. Fantastic, too, are the whole overpowering idea world of the Mandeans, that of the Gnostics, and that of the Magians, the system of origin, and the figures of the Persian Bundahish. And so he here gives you the premise, the metaphysical remnants, or the morphological tint, the prism that we can look at this region at. Now, as I said, Magian culture is now Fellahin. There is nothing left there. There's nothing worth value in terms of metaphysics. It's barren. It's completely destitute. So this is why, as a region, it's who cares? And in general, I think that they themselves haven't got enough coherence and solidified identity around themselves or around an idea other than this broad, very tenuous link of Islam. Then you are basically looking at just a bunch of tribes who more or less are unsettled and bored and try to fight each other for various reasons. The influence basically of dollars has impacted that region with an outweighted global presence. And because oil was found there, you hear much more about this region than you would otherwise. And that's it. There's literally no other reason. It's money politics. So the propellant oil and gas in economy there, and because of oil and gas as a predominating force in the Western tactics, is the reason that we care. It's the same reason we care about Nigeria, Angola, Kazakhstan, Norway, Venezuela. These are countries that we know only because they have oil. Otherwise, they're meaningless countries, maybe except Norway, which has fjords and trolls. But this is why. The second, I guess, B tier or C tier effect here is Israel. So it's not really a propellant in that way, because the idea of Israel is interlinked with this Magian life feeling. So it's a remnant of the same thing. What's happened is some fuzzy conjuration of a nation state out of the remorse of World War II as a consolation prize basically for the Jews was that Britain said, hey, we own Palestine and Transjordan. Here you go, make something of it. In true British fashion, it was a sign over of property without the forethought of what that means or is meaningful for the people who live there. It's why the partitioning of India and all these catastrophes were done, is because English administrators basically didn't care. And I would say rightly that, there's a Fellahin peoples populating something where we only consider the land valuable, that they live there as incidental to this. And otherwise, if someone wants it for any reason, we're free to just do that and give it over, or do with it as we would, because the power exists in that sphere, in that realm. So when you introduce a foreign element to any region, you will get conflict, and particularly because it's an ethnic/religious conflict, Israel-Palestine, it's irreconcilable. There is no solution. There's no two-state solution. There's no any solution. Over the next 150 years, one state will win out. And in that, there's just a complete annihilation of the other. So that's it. That's the end game. And then to balance that on even a game theory basis, you take the power dynamic and you say, which one has America, or which one has the global, the West behind it, and then there's your winner. I mean, that's really it. It's not that interesting. It's not that we're talking about. There's nothing else to that. I mean, as a humanitarian crisis, I don't know, maybe some people care. You have bleeding heart liberals, and particularly I think the white man burden people specifically come in and say, no, you can't allow suffering like this to go on. But we've allowed suffering to go on in many places without any wink or notion of savior syndrome. So you look across Africa and Asia and South America, and there are people being killed and genocided for all different reasons, and people don't really seem to care that much. So I mean, you have to contextualize all of this as to say why this one specifically. I think there's a lot of connotations around, say, like Jewish and Islam, and in particular how they have historical ties to one another that are genocidal, I guess. But there was genocides in, say, like Turkey to the Armenians or whatever you have. So, I mean, there's always someone trying to genocide someone in that region. It's really just par for the course here. So I find it very uninteresting, and that's probably the context for that. So when you have this OTOS geopolitics, it is OTOS because of its banality. There's nothing to it that's important for us. And so we look at these superficialities of like, oh no, war is bad. Oh no, we have these ethical preconceptions of why we should care about these things. But in reality, these are just projections. We're bored in our own sphere of peace, and we go like, no, we need to care about a war, what wars are going on, and which ones can we think of as closest to us. And we look at, say, something like Ukraine and Russia, we look at something like Israel-Palestine. These are geographically, if not ideologically, closest to us as they're adjacent to the West. And it's like, how close to the West can we get with war to care about it meaningfully in a way that dominates the media? And so if you have expatriates, we call them immigrants, if we have immigrants from these countries in our society, so you import for any number of reasons, Israelis or Palestinians or Ukrainians or Russians into your society, then there's a native discourse which is starting to foment because you've invited the politics domestically, and out of that you have a wellspring of conflict internally. And so now if you're in Germany and you have a Palestinian contingent and a Jewish contingent, they're now going to bicker and fight internally. And so now your media covers that and then gives voices, and it's just, you see this boredom effect of we have nothing else to talk about, let's magnify what are, as I said before, desert conflicts no one should actually give two fucks about. And this is either the boredom factor. I might also attribute it to the infinite will for meddling. So the white man, the faustian man has this infinite need to meddle. And so in any region across the globe, we concern ourselves. There isn't an untouched, pure, virginal region because we don't allow that. That's not becoming of us. We say, no, look, Antarctica, if it had people, needs to be monitored, measured, and owned by us. You can see that with Greenland, which is basically a giant wasteland in the northern Arctic Circle, where Denmark ostensibly administrates it and funds the Greenlandians, the Inuits or whatever they are. But the Americans only care about it for military and geographic geopolitical reasons. Otherwise, it's once again, it's a worthless piece of trash. But we're saying, no, no, look, we care now. We care because we're meddlers and we have to care about everything. Otherwise, someone else might care and you can't have a vacuum. We know instinctively we have to fill all vacuums with our power, otherwise someone else might. Most fellaheen states actually don't have that inclination. So it is kind of an anxiety and neuroticism born out of the own, I'm saying, no, someone will definitely do it because I have the inclination for this. Whereas most actually don't have the inclination for it or the wherewithal, the means, because it is very expensive to project power that way. Americans don't care, they have an infinite amount of money, so it's easy for them to just do that. So that goes into a little bit of also why you would care. I don't think you would. If you're an American in particular, I don't think you should care about the Middle East at all, man. If one country is bombing another or there's terrorists or who cares, really? And truly look at these maps. Like, so if you look at even just the top left here, the 1920 division of spatial boundaries and what we call nation states now is to say they're fairly changed and that the borders are malleable in that way that we can just start to see some countries want certain regions for certain peoples. And if you go into this next chart on the religious groups, and you can see that there's Sunni Muslims, there's Shia Muslims, there's all types of random things you've never heard of, like Alavis and Alawites and Wahhabis and Ibadis and Jews, Druze, Yazidis. I mean, these are meaninglessness. If you asked anyone from America to identify you, the combatants in the Yugoslav dissolution, the war, they wouldn't be able to tell you, and rightly so. No one cares. Unless you're from the region, who cares? Albanians and Serbs, and I mean, no one gives a shit. The people themselves care, obviously, and that's fine. But geopolitical, I mean, it's really pointless. You have to contextualize all of these things in the grand scale of what is a behemoth empire. You don't look at the Roman Empire and then start to break down these inter-ethnic conflicts that are happening on the border of the Roman Empire because they're meaningless. They offer no historical importance. And so to care, so to actually be furiously writing and tweeting and reading and watching and producing content on this stuff is so pointless. It's for retards. And I cannot emphasize this enough. None of this shit is important at all. Contextually, historically, for any reason you could ever assume. The only inkling of care, the iota here, the modicum of caring here should be around nuclear weaponry. And even that, because of how unsophisticated these countries are, I mean, America and Russia would nuke and glass the entire fucking region before there was an offensive nuclear weapon that was offloaded onto anyone important. So, once again, no one cares. I mean, you have this region, and if you shot it off into space, no one's worse for wear. Really, truly, no one cares outside of the region. Once again, domestic conflicts are always going to be cared by. I think just to further that, I mean, here in the red chart, it's total casualties of the war in the Middle East. Millions, obviously. Millions of people are dead. Okay, so what? And that's not me being crass or me being glib. It's to say there have been conflicts across the world where millions of people have died. China lost 60 million people in its long march. The idea that we have to care around these numbers as if they were people rather than statistics loses its bearings and meanings when we consider the world wars that our own grandparents died, and we're still feeling disaffected by that notion of that, hey, yeah, we wiped out 10 million Germans, but it's fine, they were the enemy. They were the enemy for 5 years, and we killed what was effectively 1/6 or something of their populace. Any number of women and children raped to death by Soviet forces, but we care much more around desert casualties from 1960 in Iran. You cannot make that moral argument to me. I will not buy into it. You have to selectively care. There's no way to have infinite empathy. And I think the notion of historical grievances is only most powerful when it's related to your own tribal destiny. And so in that notion, there is no tribal destiny for the fellaheen race outside of the West. And this is why, once again, we are considering things that are meaningless. You can see here in the last chart at the bottom right is the different ethnic backgrounds. And this is more to my point around the continuation of conflict as par for the course in that region. It is because it's not some enigmatic, mind-blowingly difficult, complex puzzle to solve around geopolitical, like, oh, if I was some omniscient, omnipotent being, I can go in and make everyone assuaged and peaceable. It's just not true, because the idea that you can somehow reconcile both these religious differences And then the ethnic differences. So these two maps, the top one here, religious groups in green, and then the ethnic one bottom right in multicolored orange, yellows, reds, greens. They're irreconcilable. These people will fight each other for any reason, and this is a very core identity reason to fight someone. You're a different tribe. You're completely different people. And this is why that myriad of differences starts to differentiate the friend and enemy so truly. So say, no, if I'm actually a Pathan, I'm actually a Persian, or I'm actually a Alawadi, or whatever the tribe was. I'm a Saudi. I'm a Israeli. Like these are some, you can even in Israelis you have Ashkenazi Indians, Semites, right, or like desert Israelis. So even there, you have differentiations around identity that are irreconcilable and would lead to conflict if there was no greater hyponym or shibboleth for them to bind under. So it's just prosaic. It's nothing to us other than a continuation of what is sub or ever cascading conflicts. That's it. That's basically the idea here around the videos, to say to you, stop caring. It's pointless. This whole thing is just meaningless garbage to all of you.